The story of Burkina Faso is not just another headline, not just another breaking alert. It is a testimony of struggle, of betrayal, of resilience, and of hope. And tonight, beloved, we are stepping back into a moment when shadows tried to rise once more, when whispers of a coup threatened to silence the dream of a people. September 26th, year 2023. A day when the very heart of West Africa trembled. Officers sworn to defend their homeland instead plotted in secret, believing they could snatch power under the cover of darkness. But the plot was uncovered, the hand of betrayal revealed. And history recorded not another fall, but a failed attempt. 1 year later, 2 years later, here we stand in 2025, still asking the same questions. Why do these forces return? What lies at the root of their schemes? And how has Captain Ibrahim Traoré, once the youngest leader of his land, managed not only to survive, but to reshape the destiny of his nation? So stay with me. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and walk with us through this journey of coups and courage, of peril and promise, as we uncover what really happened and what comes next for Burkina Faso. September 26th, year 2023. The night was restless in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Rumors moved faster than the motorbikes that zipped through its dusty streets. Something was stirring in the barracks, something dangerous. And then, confirmation. On the morning of the 27th, the military government spoke plainly to its people and to the world. A coup plot has been foiled. Those were the words broadcast across state television, words that cut through speculation and laid bare a chilling truth. Intelligence officers, they said, had uncovered the scheme before it could unfold. Men in uniform, once trusted, were accused of conspiring to attack the institutions of the Republic itself. Some were arrested, others fled, their names marked on warrants now carried by security forces. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who had seized power himself only 1 year earlier, it was a moment heavy with irony and with warning. Here was a man who had risen on the tide of a coup, now standing at the edge of another one. But unlike the past, this one did not succeed. The plotters had hoped to plunge the country into chaos, to undo what had barely begun to stabilize. They believed the nation was divided enough, weak enough, weary enough. But what they underestimated was the vigilance of intelligence services and the watchful eyes of a people who had grown tired of endless betrayal. That day, thousands poured into the streets of Ouagadougou. They came not in anger, but in solidarity. They carried flags. They sang chants. They spoke one name again and again: Traoré. For them, he was not merely the man in uniform. He was the bulwark against yet another collapse. Yet, beloved, let us not forget the wounds beneath the chants. This coup attempt was not born in isolation. It followed a pattern. In January 2022, an elected president, Rochmark Christian Traoré, was overthrown by soldiers who claimed they could do better. In September of that same year, the man who had seized power, Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, was himself ousted by Traoré. 2 coups in 8 months, and now a third attempt in less than a year. The people of Burkina Faso had lived through enough to recognize the smell of betrayal. They remembered promises broken, battles lost against insurgents, families displaced by violence. More than 17,000 lives claimed by jihadist attacks since 2015. More than 2 million forced from their homes. So when whispers of another coup rose in 2023, it was not only the government that stood guard, it was the citizens themselves. Women marched with placards. Men raised their fists in defiance. Elders prayed openly in the streets. They declared, "We will not go back." And the government, sensing the tide of support, spoke with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Officials lamented that officers who once swore an oath had strayed, hindering the nation's fight for sovereignty and freedom from terror. Yet their voices carried determination. This plot would not succeed, and those responsible would face justice. The failed coup became more than a headline. It became a mirror reflecting the fragility of Burkina Faso and the resilience of its people. It showed that even within the armed forces, discontent still brewed, that the struggle for control was far from over. But it also revealed something new. A society unwilling to surrender, a leader unshaken by conspiracies, and a movement that drew strength not from fear, but from unity. Still, the story of that September day cannot end with applause alone. Because every plot leaves scars, every betrayal leaves echoes, and the question lingered then, as it lingers now. Why do these conspiracies return again and again, like shadows refusing to fade? Cliffhanger. In the next part, we must look deeper, into the soil where these seeds of rebellion are sown, into the pain that drives officers to turn against their own oath, and into the choices that Ibrahim Traoré made in response. For the roots of 2023 reach far beyond a single day. Beloved, no coup rises from thin air. Every plot, every whisper, every midnight meeting in a darkened room grows from a soil already poisoned. And in Burkina Faso, that soil has been watered with frustration, disappointment, and pain. Since 2015, jihadist insurgencies have spread like wildfire from Mali into Burkina Faso. Villages were burned, schools were closed, families fled with only the clothes on their backs, 17,000 dead, more than 2 million displaced. And the army, yes, the very army sworn to protect, struggled to contain the storm. Soldiers were underpaid, under-equipped, and often outgunned. It was this despair that birthed the coup of January 2022, when officers declared they could protect the people better than an elected president. It was this despair again that drove Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba to seize power, and later it was the same despair that gave Ibrahim Traoré his opening in September of that year. Coup after coup, justified always by the cry, "We will end the insurgency." Yet the attacks continued, the blood continued to flow, and trust continued to erode. By 2023, discontent simmered in the barracks once again. Young officers watched comrades fall. Villagers demanded protection that never came. And some began to whisper, "Maybe we need another change." That whisper, beloved, became the attempted coup of September 26th. Now, let us look at the consequences. Every coup, successful or not, leaves behind broken trust. Families wonder if their sons in uniform are loyal to the flag or to ambition. Citizens fear that every sunrise may bring new rulers, new decrees, new instability. Investors withdraw. Farmers cannot sell their crops. Children cannot return to school. The very fabric of a nation frays. And yet, in that failed coup of 2023, something different happened. For the first time, the people themselves rose in defiance, not against government, but against the plotters. They marched, they prayed, they chanted. They said, "Enough." The failure of the coup did not just preserve Traoré's rule, it exposed a growing will among Burkinabe citizens to protect their fragile sovereignty. And what of Traoré himself? How did he respond? He could have lashed out indiscriminately, purging whole ranks of the army in a wave of paranoia. He could have silenced dissent with brutal force, but instead, his government spoke with sorrow, not only anger. They said, "It is regrettable that officers who once swore to defend this land have strayed." The words carried both rebuke and lament, like a father grieving over lost sons. Then came action. Suspects were arrested. Warrants were issued. Investigations were opened, not only into the coup itself, but into earlier rumors of sabotage. By confronting the betrayal firmly yet carefully, Traoré sent a message. Treason would not be tolerated, but the military would not be dismantled by fear. At the same time, he turned outward, to the people. He allowed the marches. He allowed the chants of solidarity. He welcomed the crowds that rallied under his name. For in that moment, Traoré understood. Power in Burkina Faso no longer rested solely in the barrel of a gun, but in the unity of its citizens. This dual approach, iron fist against traitors, open hand to the people, shaped his survival. It was not just strategy, it was necessity. For a leader who rose by coup to resist another coup, he needed more than soldiers. He needed legitimacy, however fragile, however contested. And legitimacy came from those who filled the streets, those who prayed in the churches, those who stood guard at their village gates when the state could not. Beloved, here is the truth. The coup of 2023 was not only a test of security, it was a test of leadership. And Ibrahim Traoré, still young, still unseasoned, passed that test not by fear alone, but by balancing fear with hope. But survival is not the same as transformation. Stopping a coup is one thing. Building a nation is another. In the next part, we will ask, what did Traoré do with this second chance? Did he merely cling to power, or did he begin to change Burkina Faso in ways that echo still today? Beloved, it is one thing to survive betrayal. It is another thing entirely to transform survival into renewal. After the failed coup of 2023, many asked, would Captain Ibrahim Traoré cling to his chair in fear, or would he rise to become more than a man in uniform? The answer unfolded slowly, then unmistakably, in the years that followed. First, he turned to security, the wound that had birthed so many upheavals. The insurgency had spread pain for nearly a decade. Villages burned, families displaced, soldiers disillusioned. Traoré declared, "No more." Under his watch, local defense groups were restructured and given clearer chains of command. Communities were armed not recklessly, but responsibly to guard their own boundaries. He sought alliances with regional partners, not to surrender sovereignty, but to strengthen collective resistance. And for the first time in years, small towns once abandoned began to see their people return. Mothers carried water without fear. Children walked back to schools long shuttered. The tide was not yet reversed, but it was slowing. Second, he turned to governance. Where past leaders had promised and failed, Traoré moved with swiftness. Ministries were pressed to cut corruption. Funds, once disappearing into hidden pockets, were redirected to health clinics and schools. The process was not perfect, what process ever is. But citizens saw signs. A clinic reopened in Kaya, a new road laid in Fada Ngorma. These were not miracles, but they were seeds. Third, he turned to the soul of the people. Here, beloved, is where leadership became more than policy. In marketplaces, in churches, on the radio waves, his words carried a new rhythm. They were no longer only commands of a soldier, they were calls of a leader striving to inspire. One Ibrahim Traoré speech after another reminded his nation that sovereignty is not just a slogan, it is a duty. He said, "Sovereignty is not given, it is lived. Every farmer, every teacher, every soldier, every child must walk in it daily." These words stirred something deep, echoing in villages where people had once felt forgotten. And then came the changes felt in the smallest corners of life. Food aid was redirected to those most in need. Educational programs were launched to train young people not only in arms, but in agriculture, in technology, in enterprise. Women were invited into councils, where once their voices had been absent. Elders were consulted, not sidelined. Beloved, do not mistake this for perfection. The struggles were still many. The insurgency did not vanish overnight. Corruption did not dissolve like mist at dawn. But the people began to say, "At last, a leader is listening." And in a land so long bruised by betrayal, even the act of listening was revolutionary. International observers scoffed. They said, "It is propaganda. It is image-making." But those who walked dusty roads, those who tilled parched fields, those who prayed in half-ruined chapels, they felt the difference. They saw soldiers stand their ground instead of fleeing. They saw officials answer questions instead of hiding. They saw a horizon where before there had only been darkness. Traore became not just a captain in the army, but a captain of a ship steering through storms. His youth, once mocked, became his strength. He connected with the restless energy of the young and the weary patience of the old. He carried both sword and shield, but also the olive branch of dialogue. And in the hearts of many Burkinabe, hope flickered again. Fragile, yes. Faint, yes. But hope nonetheless. Yet, as hope grew at home, whispers spread abroad. Foreign capitals watched with unease. For every step Burkina Faso took toward self-reliance, others saw a step away from their influence. And so the question must be asked, how did the world respond to this rising confidence? Beloved, no nation moves alone. Every step on African soil sends ripples across oceans. And when Captain Ibrahim Traoré began to steer Burkina Faso toward a path of sovereignty, those ripples became waves felt in distant capitals. In Paris, the whispers were sharp. France, once the unchallenged power in its former colony, now found its influence questioned, its presence diminished. Observers noted that French officials spoke of concern. But behind closed doors, their words carried more heat. Aid programs were reconsidered. Military cooperation was scaled back. The old ties of empire strained under the weight of a new resolve. In Washington, the response was measured, yet unmistakably tense. American voices warned of instability, of a dangerous precedent. They framed the government's choices not as self-determination, but as risk. Yet within African American communities across the United States, another voice rose, a voice of solidarity. Churches prayed for Burkina Faso. Activists praised a young leader daring to resist the old order. The diaspora felt the echo of their own struggles in his stand. London, too, watched closely. British diplomats issued careful statements urging respect for democratic norms, but their caution could not hide their unease. For every declaration of concern, there was also the unspoken fear. What if other nations followed this path? What if Africa itself began to turn the page on dependency? And then, within Africa, the reactions were divided. Some neighbors offered quiet support, seeing in Traoré's boldness a chance to push back against external meddling. Others worried aloud, fearing the domino effect of coups and the danger of alienating international partners. The African Union spoke of stability, of unity, yet their statements balanced precariously between principle and politics. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations raised alarms. They warned of risks to aid delivery, of refugees caught in limbo, of communities still desperate for relief. Their voices were not entirely wrong. The crisis remained real. But many within Burkina Faso answered, "We welcome help, but not control. We need partners, not masters." The media, as always, carried its own divide. Western outlets often described Traoré as reckless, even dictatorial. African platforms, especially those led by young journalists, framed him as courageous, even visionary. On social media, hashtags multiplied, And across 54 nations, youth debated whether Burkina Faso was the spark of something larger. Beloved, here is the tension. What inspires one world unsettles another. To the West, Traore's steps were defiance. To many Africans, his steps were dignity. To aid agencies, his policies were disruption. To his people, they were deliverance. And so we must ask, between suspicion abroad and support at home, what road lies ahead? For the future of Burkina Faso will not be written by foreign pens alone. The ink will be the sweat, the tears, and the courage of its own people. Beloved, every nation that rises from trial must face the harder question, what now? The failed coup of 2023, the resilience of the people, the reforms that followed, these were only the beginning. For the path ahead is steep, filled with both shadows and light. First, let us speak plainly of the challenges. The insurgency is not yet defeated. Armed groups still roam the countryside, and families still live in fear. The economy bears scars, markets fragile, inflation biting, youth unemployed. Corruption, though wounded, is not slain. And trust in institutions remains fragile, for after so many betrayals, even truth struggles to be believed. These are mountains not easily moved. Second, the opportunities. Burkina Faso is rich not only in minerals, but in the spirit of its people. The soil, though dry, can feed millions. The rivers, though strained, can give life. And the youth, oh, the youth, carry fire in their eyes, ready to build if only given the tools. The return of displaced families, small though it may be, signals that healing is possible. A new generation, watching closely, is eager to write a chapter different from their fathers. Third, the choices. The Burkina Faso president of tomorrow, whether Traore or another, must carry the lessons of these years. Sovereignty cannot be empty rhetoric. It must mean justice in the courts, fairness in the markets, protection in the villages, and dignity in the schools. It must mean not only defying the powers outside, but uplifting the lives within. The road ahead demands balance. Partnership, yes, but not dependency. Strength, yes, but not tyranny. Courage, yes, but also compassion. For a nation is not saved by slogans, nor by soldiers alone, but by the steady weaving of trust between government and governed. Beloved, here is the truth we must cling to. Burkina Faso is not condemned to remain a headline of coups and crises. It can become a beacon. It can turn from being a land remembered for suffering to a land remembered for resilience. The journey is long. The nights will be dark, but dawn belongs to those who endure. And so, as we look toward that dawn, one final question remains. What is the legacy that will be told of these years? That is the question we shall answer as we close with the story's final chapter. Beloved, we have walked together through shadows and storms. We have revisited that night in 2023 when betrayal was unmasked, when a coup collapsed before it could rise. We have traced the roots of unrest, the wounds of insurgency, the pain of displacement. We have seen how Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young and untested, grew into a leader who balanced firmness with compassion, and how his people, tired of endless betrayal, found their voice. We have heard of reforms that rekindled hope, of villages where children returned to school, of markets where women sold grain again without fear. We have witnessed how the world watched, some with suspicion, others with admiration, as a small West African nation declared its right to stand on its own. And now, as the story continues in 2025, the question lingers. What legacy shall remain? Will Burkina Faso be remembered as a land of coups, or as a land that chose courage over chaos? Will Traoré be remembered only as a soldier, or as a statesman? In every Ibrahim Traoré speech, that choice is being shaped, not by words alone, but by actions lived in villages, towns, and cities. The burden of the Burkina Faso president, whoever holds that title, is immense, to carry not only authority, but accountability, to rule not only by decree, but by dignity. To remember that sovereignty is not just defiance to outsiders, it is service to one's own people. And here is where you, my brothers and sisters, play a part. History is not written only in palaces and parliaments. It is written in prayers, in conversations, in the solidarity of diaspora communities. It is written when you share these stories, when you add your voice to the call for justice, when you refuse to let silence bury the truth. So I ask you, what lesson do you see in this journey? What must Africa, what must the world learn from Burkina Faso's struggle? Comment below. Share your reflections. Let your wisdom enrich this dialogue. And if you believe stories like this must continue to be told, do not leave without action. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Because together, our voices can carry further than any headline. Beloved, remember this. Every Ibrahim Traoré speech may stir hearts, but it is the people's unity that will light the path ahead. And in that unity, the dawn of Burkina Faso and of Africa awaits.